The Pink Letter is a sealed scroll delivered to Lord Commander Jon Snow in his final chapter, Jon 13, A Dance with Dragons. Named after its pink wax seal, the letter acts as a catalyst for Jon's fateful decision to break his vows and involve the Night's Watch in the Wars of Westeros by marching on Winterfell. Since Dance's release, the Pink Letter has become one of the most debated mysteries in the fandom, spawning endless theories about its true author, its disputed claims, and its consequences. In the following analysis, we will dissect the letter's contents and examine the primary suspects behind the letter. This analysis proposes a forensic examination of the letter's text to ascertain its authorship. Our procedure will commence with a close reading of the document and a summary of its features, followed by an explanation of methodology. We will then assess the evidentiary case for each major suspect, eliminating the candidates until the most probable author remains. To solve this mystery, we need to start with the source. Before analyzing the suspects, let's revisit the exact text of the Pink Letter and the immediate context of its delivery. By this point in the story, Jon's leadership has pushed the boundaries of the Watch's neutrality to a breaking point. He has allowed thousands of wildlings, the historic enemies of the Night's Watch, through the Wall, straining the Order's resources and inflaming traditionalists like Bowen Marsh. In an effort to fortify the abandoned castles along the Wall, Jon relies heavily on wildling manpower, upsetting the Lords of Westeros and his own Black brothers. He further compromised the Watch's political neutrality by arranging the marriage of Aly's Karstark to the wildling leader Sigorn, Magnar Athen, and imprisoning her uncle Cregan Karstark. He has also negotiated a secret treaty with Tycho Nestoris of the Iron Bank, using wildling gold to secure supplies, a move to bypass both Stannis Baratheon, who demands political support in return for further aid, and Queen Cersei, who refused to send any at all. Jon's attempts to balance these conflicting loyalties have satisfied no one. He has rejected Ramsay Bolton's demand for fealty from Barrowtown, refused Stannis' direct request for support, and maintained a paper-thin facade of neutrality towards the Iron Throne despite harboring Stannis. Each refusal has deepened his isolation and increased danger to the Watch. To top this all off, Jon Snow's political situation becomes personal when Jon learns that his sister Arya, who he believed dead, is reportedly alive and set to marry Ramsay Bolton at Winterfell. This news torments him, and he struggles between his duties as Lord Commander and his duties to his old family. Jon's internal conflict leads him to secretly conspire with Melisandre, using the glamoured Mance Rayder in a covert mission to rescue Arya in violation of the Night's Watch's neutrality. The Pink Letter appears to arrive as the consequence of that failed plot, transforming a personal crisis into a direct political ultimatum, and pushing Jon towards his final decision to put his family before the Watch. We need to talk about the ranging. I want us to be of one mind at Shield Hall. We must... He broke off when Mully poked his nose inside the door, grim-faced, to announce that Clydas had brought a letter. Tell him to leave it with you. I will read it later. As you say, my lord, only Clydas don't look his proper self. He's more white than pink, if you get my meaning, and he's shaking. Dark wings, dark words, muttered Tormund. Isn't that what you Kneelers say? We say bleed a cold but feast a fever too, Jon told him. We say never drink with Dornishmen when the moon is full. We say a lot of things. Mully added his 2 groats. My old grandmother always used to say, summer friends will melt away like summer snows, but winter friends are friends forever. I think that's sufficient wisdom for the moment, said Jon Snow. Show Clydas in, if you would be so good. Mully had not been wrong. The old steward was trembling, his face pale as the snows outside. I am being foolish, Lord Commander, but this letter frightens me. See here? Bastard was the only word written outside the scroll. No Lord Snow, or Jon Snow, or Lord Commander. Simply bastard. And the letter was sealed with a smear of hard pink wax. You were right to come at once, Jon said. You were right to be afraid. He cracked the seal, flattened the parchment, and read. Your false king is dead. He and all his host were smashed in 7 days of battle. I have his magic sword. Tell his red woman. Your false king's friends are dead, their heads upon the walls of Winterfell. Come see them. Your false king lied, and so did you. You told the world you burned the king beyond the wall, Instead, you sent him to Winterfell to steal my bride from me. I will have my bride back. If you want Mance Rayder back, come and get him. I have him in a cage for all the North to see, proof of your lies. The cage is cold, but I have made him a warm cloak from the skins of the 6 women who came with him to Winterfell. I want my bride back. I want the false king's queen. I want his daughter and his red witch. I want his wildling princess. I want his little prince, the wildling babe. And I want my reek. Send them to me, and I will not trouble you or your black crows. Keep them from me, and I will cut out your heart and eat it. Ramsay Bolton, true-born Lord of Winterfell. Jon Snow and the reader are made to believe that this letter is from Ramsay Bolton because of the context prior in the book that establishes the pink wax as the mark of the Dreadfort. In Jon 6, A Dance with Dragons, we see a confirmed genuine letter from Ramsay Bolton that arrives at the wall. Lord Snow, he turned to find Clyda standing beneath the broken archway, a parchment in his hand. From Stannis, Jon had been hoping for some word from the king. The Night's Watch took no part, he knew, and it should not matter to him which king emerged triumphant. Somehow, it did. Is it Deepwood? No, my lord. Clydas thrust the parchment forward. It was tightly rolled and sealed, with a button of hard pink wax. Only the Dreadfort uses pink sealing wax. Jon ripped off his gauntlet, took the letter, and cracked the seal. When he saw the signature, he forgot the battering Raldoshirt had given him. At first glance, the letter seems to confirm Jon's covert mission using grants has failed spectacularly. The letter claims total victory over Stannis and the capture of Mance Rayder. It demands the surrender of several people under Jon's protection, threatening the Night's Watch if he refuses. The letter's contents are pure vitriol, designed to provoke a response from Jon Snow. The author of the letter does not merely want Jon Snow to kneel and obey. He doesn't merely want Jon Snow to return his things. The author wants Jon Snow to come to Winterfell, talking about the heads on the wall and asking Jon to, quote, come see them, is deliberately goading him, along with the many insults contained within the letter. However, with each subsequent reading, new holes in the story appear based on what the reader knows. In Theon 1, A Dance with Dragons, Theon Greyjoy jumps off the wall of Winterfell and into the snowbanks with Jane Poole in his arms. In Asha's chapter, called The Sacrifice, A Dance with Dragons, the Braavosi banker Tycho Nestoris shows up to Stannis' camp at the Crofters' village with Theon Greyjoy and Jane Poole. Mance's plan succeeded, although at great cost to those who carried it out. With the information from Asha's POV, the reader knows that Stannis has not been defeated in battle. If Ramsay had defeated Stannis, he would already possess Jane and Theon, since they're at his camp, and would not be asking Jon Snow for them. Therefore, we know that this letter is at least partially false. Stannis has not been defeated, and the battle did not go on for 7 days. We can also deduce that Stannis and his host are still alive, and that Bolton doesn't have his magic sword, and that Stannis' friends are not dead, nor are their heads on the walls of Winterfell. If this truly is Ramsay Bolton, he's lying to Jon Snow, further supporting the notion that this letter was written to provoke him. To find the author of the pink letter, we will treat it like a criminal investigation. Our main tool in this investigation is the process of elimination. We begin with a broad pool of potential suspects, any character with a motive regarding Jon Snow or the Bolton regime. Our goal is to narrow this pool by applying successive filters of possibility. The first and most fundamental filter is literacy. The author either wrote the letter personally or commanded someone literate to write it on their behalf. This requirement immediately eliminates the vast majority of smallfolk, common soldiers, and many wildlings, such as Tormund Giantsbane. The culprit must therefore be nobility, a learned person, such as a maester, septon, or banker, or someone with access to such a person. With this single criterion, we have dramatically reduced the field of suspects. Tormund, for instance, is illiterate and doesn't command anyone who can write. Most of the Night's Watch is similarly excluded, as literacy is a rare skill in the Watch, so rare that those who possess it, like Clydas, are often promoted for that ability alone. While Clydas is one of the few at Castle Black capable of writing the letter, he lacks a plausible motive to instigate Jon's march on Winterfell. Clydas has been a part of the Watch for decades, serving as a steward and assisting Master Aemon. Clydas has been a reliable ally to Jon Snow throughout the series, including when he healed Jon's wounds. His visible fear upon delivering the pink letter appears genuine, and we have no evidence to suggest he's a skilled actor or a forger. We have textual evidence that Clydas is genuinely afraid of the letter, and we have no textual evidence that Clydas himself suspects a forgery. The second filter is timeliness. The letter arrives at Castle Black shortly after the escape of Jane Poole and Theon Greyjoy from Winterfell, representing the first news that Jon receives of these events. This creates an exceptionally narrow window for its dispatch. The letter's purpose, to provoke Jon, relies on it being the first report that he hears. If official news or other rumors from Winterfell reached him first, Jon's reaction might be more measured, and the provocation would fail. Therefore, the sender must have had either immediate knowledge or foreknowledge of the escape, and the means to write the letter and send a raven ahead of any other message. On a related note, the third filter is means of delivery. The letter arrived by raven. This requires access to ravens, and a maester, or someone skilled with raven craft. Each raven goes to a different castle, and the author would have needed the ability to pick the correct raven that flies to Castle Black. This points to someone at a castle with a rookery, like Winterfell, the Dreadfort, or maybe Stannis' camps if he brought ravens with him. The fourth filter is materials. The author needed access to parchment, writing materials, and pink wax. The fifth and most important filter is knowledge. This is about possessing the specific details contained in the letter at the time it was sent. Who had the requisite knowledge to write the letter? In criminal jurisprudence, exclusive knowledge of a crime is considered overwhelming evidence towards an accused person's guilt. This principle is illustrated by the Canadian Supreme Court case called Wildman, where the accused's detailed knowledge of a murder was considered such overwhelming evidence towards his guilt that it alone could reasonably sustain a conviction if left unexplained. In that case, the stepfather of a girl who was brutally murdered with an axe was convicted largely based on a single piece of circumstantial evidence: his knowledge of the axe. The day after the murder occurred, but before the victim's body was discovered, and before police had released any details about the cause of death, the stepfather told his lawyer that the girl had been killed with an axe. As the Supreme Court of Canada noted, this pre-disclosure knowledge was, if unexplained, fatal to the accused, because it placed him at the scene of the crime. Quote, "Finally, and in my view, if unexplained, fatal to the accused, was the fact that he made statements indicating that he had knowledge of the cause of death, the nature and location of the injuries, and of the kind of weapon used prior to that information being released by the police. Indeed, even prior to the discovery of the body, and prior to the police themselves becoming aware of those circumstances." What justified the Court of Appeal in finding, as they did, the evidence overwhelming was the result of the following additional evidence. Trisha disappeared on February 15th, and her body was discovered 4 days later, on February 19th. Prior to the 19th, no one could be sure that Trisha was dead. Whether death was self-inflicted or involved another person, was accidental or intentional, the nature and location of the wounds inflicted, the instrument, if any, used, or probably used, to inflict the wound. Yet on February 16th, Wildman phoned a Mr. Bayer, his divorce lawyer, and told him, quote, that his wife had accused him of killing Trisha with an axe, end quote. After the discovery of Trisha's body on the 19th, the police, because of the sheath found 28 inches from the body, started looking for a hatchet. On that day, a press release by the police said that she had been battered with a blunt instrument. On that evening, the police interrogated Wildman about a hatchet. On the 20th, Wildman said to a witness that someone put an axe in Trisha's head. It was only on February 23rd that the police revealed with precision the nature of the wounds, and only on February 28th the use of a hatchet. On February 19th, 23rd, and 25th, the appellant mentioned to various persons that Trisha had been killed with an axe. His knowledge of the circumstances of the crime on the 19th, 23rd, and 25th is not unexplained. He was questioned with insistence by the police on the 19th about a hatchet, and the police press release referred to Trisha having been battered with a blunt instrument. It would not be unreasonable for Wildman to suspect that the police were of the view that the blunt instrument was a hatchet, and that some of the wounds, if not all, would be to the head, since Trisha had been battered to death. But what needed explanation was his statement to his lawyer on the 16th. Whoever knew those details on that date had to either have participated or witnessed the crime, or have received the information from someone who had. This facet of evidence law is shared across the common law, i.e. the English-speaking world. As demonstrated in Wildman, exclusive pre-disclosure knowledge of a crime can serve as overwhelming evidence of guilt. Similarly, for the Pink Letter, the author's intimate awareness of sensitive and recent events acts as a direct link to their identity. Therefore, the pool of suspects narrows decisively to only those who could have known all of the letter's contents when it was sent. The author is betrayed by their knowledge. Whoever held this collection of facts at that critical time was either a participant in the events at Winterfell, a direct witness, or in communication with one. This knowledge filter is the most powerful of all, as it ties the author to Winterfell. Here is a list of all of the filters. I've organized them into a few broad categories. First is general logistics, next is events at Winterfell, then they need to know some things about Stannis, and finally they need to know some things about the Wall. They must be literate or command a literate person, such as a maester. They must have access to ravens. They have to know which specific raven flies to Castle Black. They have to have access to parchment, ink, and a quill, and pink sealing wax. They also need to compose and send the letter before anybody else can contradict what is inside the letter, which means that it has to be sent first, and it has to be sent with the knowledge that it's not going to be quickly contradicted by Stannis, Theon Greyjoy, or any of the Northern Lords at Winterfell. The author also needs to have immediate knowledge or foreknowledge of Theon's escape from Winterfell. He needs to know about Reek, and he needs to know about Mance Rayder and his mission to Winterfell and the details of that mission. He also needs to know some things about Stannis, that Jon Snow ostensibly supports Stannis, about the Red Priestess, and about the magic sword. The author of the letter also needs to know or strongly suspect that Jon Snow will be incensed by being called a bastard, to such a degree that he will abandon his oaths. The requirement is not merely that he will be offended, as anybody can guess that, but offended to such a degree that he will break his vows. A couple of other things that the author needs to know about the Wall is basically the whole Mance Rayder plot and the details of that, along with the presence of certain individuals at the Wall, such as Mance Rayder's son and Melisandre. And they also need to know or suspect that Jon Snow is at Castle Black to receive the letter so that he can be provoked. One of the requisite pieces of knowledge for the Pink Letter's author, familiarity with operational mechanics of messenger ravens, might seem weird. As this method of communication is unfamiliar to many modern readers, a brief explanation is warranted to clarify why this knowledge serves as a critical, non-negotiable filter for our investigation. In the real medieval world, messenger birds were typically homing pigeons. George Martin models the use of ravens in Westeros directly on this system, and there's textual evidence that they operate identically in Theon 1, The Winds of Winter. Contrary to common perception, a messenger raven is not a courier that can be dispatched to any recipient. Its function is rooted in the natural instinct to return home. This means that a raven will only deliver a message to the place it considers home. To send a letter to Castle Black, one must use a raven that was raised in Castle Black's rookery. In practice, this requires castles to raise ravens and then send them in cages to other holdfasts, establishing a fixed one-way communication network. The sender must therefore have access to the specific bird whose home is the intended destination. To send a letter, the maester ties a scroll of parchment to its leg or foot, then releases it from the cage. When released, the raven navigates vast distances using the sun, geomagnetic senses, and landmarks to return to its point of origin. Sending a reply requires a mirrored, prearranged setup with a raven from the sender's own rookery. The system is a series of fixed one-way routes, not a flexible network. Therefore, the criterion is not merely about knowing that ravens can carry messages. The sender must understand the homing instinct, and crucially must know which specific raven in the available cages is destined for Castle Black. Anyone lacking this knowledge could not have physically sent the letter. This presents a significant problem for suspects within Winterfell. When the castle was sacked, Maester Luwin's ravens were lost. The young Maester Henley, who now tends to the rookery, had to import new ravens to re-establish communication lines. In the brief, chaotic time since, it is highly unlikely that he has diligently labeled these birds for anyone else's convenience. Circumstantial evidence suggests Henley is the only person in Winterfell who can identify which raven flies to which castle. Therefore, if the pink letter was sent from Winterfell, Henley was the sender. However, this does not make him the author. It means that any plausible author within Winterfell's walls, be it Ramsay Bolton, Mance Rayder, or another person, must have convinced Henley to dispatch the letter on their behalf. This intermediary step becomes a logistical hurdle that any Winterfell theory must credibly explain. Having established our filters, we can now systematically evaluate the list of plausible suspects. Crucially, we will set aside motive at first. As in a court of law, establishing the actus reus must precede the analysis of intent. To consider the motivations of a character who lacks the means to commit the act is a waste of resources, and can sometimes lead to mistakes. Therefore, we will first disqualify any suspects who cannot satisfy the requirements for having written the letter within the necessary time frame. Only those who survive this initial culling warrant further examination for motive and narrative plausibility. So let's take a look at our suspects. Bloodraven, Littlefinger, Varys, Tycho Nestoris, Hosteen Frey, Bowen Marsh or the Night's Watch Conspiracy, Queen Selyse, the Karstarks, Theon Greyjoy, Melisandre, Stannis, Roose Bolton, Ramsay Bolton, Mance Rayder, Jane Poole, Wyman Manderly, Lady Barbary Dustin, one of the Risewells, Lord Slate, Lord Harwood Stout, Moorsumber, Hotherumber, the Serwins, Hornwoods, or Tallhearts, one of the Maesters at Winterfell, Aenys Frey, Big Walder Frey, Little Walder Frey, Tormund Giantsbane, or Val. Of the potential authors within Winterfell, several can be immediately ruled out. Little Walder Frey was killed by Mance's Spearwives. Aenys Frey was killed by Moorsumber's pit traps, as confirmed in Theon 1, The Winds of Winter. Tormund Giantsbane is illiterate and lacks an intended scribe. Similarly, while intelligent, there is no textual evidence for Val being literate, and she lacks access to writing materials, and the logistical challenge of secretly procuring parchment and pink wax from the secured rookery is improbable. Big Walder Frey lacks the clandestine authority to command a maester's cooperation. And finally, Jane Poole is psychologically shattered by her torture and is in no state to orchestrate such a scheme. These exclusions leave us with about 24 plausible candidates. Before applying filters, we can set aside several universal prerequisites. All of the remaining suspects would be aware of the rumors about Stannis' Red Priestess and his magic sword. They would know of Jon Snow's public support for the king, and they would reasonably assume that the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch resides at Castle Black. To streamline our analysis further, we can consolidate a significant block of suspects by acknowledging the Northern Conspiracy. This faction, whose existence and goals are revealed by Lord Wyman Manderly in Davos 4, Dance with Dragons, operates with shared intelligence and the common goal of deposing the Boltons. For the purpose of identifying the letter's author, its members can be treated as a collective suspect pool, as the act could easily be a coordinated effort. The full membership and evidence for this conspiracy is a rich subject that deserves its own dedicated exploration. For the sake of this argument, we will simply assert its core includes figures such as Lord Wyman Manderly, Sir Robert Glover, Lady Barbary Dustin, the Umbers, both Hother and Moore's Crowfood, and elements of House Hornwood, Serwyn, Slate, Risewell, and Mormont. We will therefore assess their potential as one entity rather than individually, as the authorship would ultimately serve the conspiracy's collective goal. The consolidation leaves us with 15 distinct remaining suspects. Bloodraven, Littlefinger, Varys, Tycho Nestoris, Hosteen Frey, Bowen Marsh, Queen Selyse, the Karstarks, Theon Greyjoy, Melisandre, Stannis, Roose Bolton, Ramsay Bolton, Mance Rayder, and the Northern Conspiracy. Bryden Rivers, also known as Bloodraven, is the most outlandish of the remaining suspects in the Pink Ladder mystery. As a centuries-old greenseer merged with a weirwood tree, he possesses a form of omniscience regarding events that have occurred in front of any heart tree in Westeros. This could theoretically grant him with the knowledge required for the letter, the escape of Theon, the use of the name Reek, and the presence of Mance Rayder and his spearwives in Winterfell. Furthermore, his ability to see both the past and the future gives him multiple plausible motives for orchestrating the letter that do not need to be explored in detail, as we can imagine almost anything. However, there are immediate practical obstacles. Bloodraven is physically entombed in a cave deep beyond the wall, connected to the roots of a weirwood, so he can't exactly write a letter. I was unable to find textual evidence that this cave contains a rookery, nor the parchment, ink, quills, or pink wax necessary to produce the letter. Even if such materials were present, dispatching a raven from this location to Castle Black presents another insurmountable problem. Bloodraven is besieged from all sides by Ice Wights and the others. They would shoot down any bird that emerges from this cave. Bloodraven lacks the means to be the physical point of origin. One workaround is that Bloodraven worked into a human at Castle Black, Winterfell, or another castle, forced them to write the letter, and then sent it. But this theory requires a cascade of suppositions. There's no precedent in the text for Bloodraven working into another human, let alone to perform a complex task like writing a political missive, all while maintaining the precision of the letter's contents, and with his puppet remembering nothing of the incident afterwards. Hodor, for example, is conscious while being warged by Bran, and remembers the violation of his consent afterwards. We have every reason to believe that if Bloodraven is capable of warging into another person, they would be conscious during the event, and remember afterwards, and would likely say something. Therefore, this theory is a stretch of his established capabilities. The pink letter warg theory also contradicts with every documented instance of Bloodraven's interventions in the story so far. His methods are indirect and suggestive. He works through dreams, luring Bran north, haunting Euron, through prophetic whispers, guiding Jojen Reed, and through visions. He entices rather than commands. The most relevant example occurs in the Winterfell crisis itself. When Bloodraven intervenes to influence the escape plot, he does so by having Bran speak through the weirwood tree in the Godswood. His message to Theon is a subtle whisper, Theon, to affirm his identity. This is the mystical nudge that empowers Theon's agency to achieve Bran's desired end. To propose that the same entity also warged into a person to compose the pink letter is to propose a radical and unexplained bifurcation of his character. Therefore, it's not completely impossible, but it's highly unlikely. And in my view, this proves that Bloodraven did not do it beyond a reasonable doubt. While Petyr Baelish possesses the materials to have physically written the pink letter, literacy, ravens, materials, and the ability to forge pink wax, the theory implicating him rests on unsupported assumptions. First, the text provides no evidence that Baelish has a functional network of agents in the North, capable of gathering the letter's intelligence. His only confirmed asset in the North, Jane Poole, is compromised and in no position to report. There is no indication that he is aware of Mance Rayder's mission, Melisandre's presence at the wall, or Theon's Reek persona. Second, while anyone might guess that Jon would be offended by slurs, Baelish has no basis to predict that it would provoke Jon to outright abandon his Night's Watch vows and march south with an army. The letter requires not just an understanding of insult, but foresight into his oath-breaking rage. Finally, the issue of timing is fatal to the theory. Unlike Varys or Bloodraven, Baelish has no magical foresight or supernatural sources of information. Stationed in the Vale and engrossed in his schemes there, he cannot have immediate real-time knowledge of rapidly unfolding events at Winterfell, such as Theon's escape or Mance's capture. Any ravens or rumors would reach him with a significant delay, making it impossible for him to compose the letter with its urgent insider knowledge before official news or contradictory reports could reach Jon Snow at Castle Black. The case against Varys, while distinct from that against Baelish, ultimately falters on a similar structural flaw. Admittedly, Varys presents a stronger candidate in key areas. He possesses the requisite materials and, unlike Baelish, maintains a vast intelligence network capable of gathering the necessary information. His hinted-at connection to magic could, in theory, address any remaining gaps in his knowledge. However, the insurmountable problem remains one of orchestration and precision. Even with his spies and sorcery, Varys could not guarantee the letter's critical timing, as he must, in the end, rely on agency to carry out the plot. His raven would still be subject to delays, and there's no evidence he could know with certainty that his missive would reach Jon Snow at the precise moment. After Theon's escape, but before any contradictory communication from Stannis, Northern Loyalists, or the Bolton themselves could arrive at Castle Black. The plan requires Jon to receive the letter in an informational vacuum, and to act on it impulsively, before that vacuum can be filled by fact. Varys has no basis to forecast such a specific and immediate chain of events from a continent away. Therefore, while possible, the theory demands a series of perfect unverifiable contingencies. We can confidently conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that Varys is not the letter's author. Tycho Nestoris is eliminated as a suspect by insurmountable logistical constraints. At the time the pink letter was sent, he was traveling through winter storms and had no access to the ravens required to dispatch it. The physical means to write and send the letter did not exist for him. Beyond this practical impossibility, the theory fails on knowledge and motive. While Tycho knew of Mance Rayder and that Abel's group had infiltrated Winterfell, there is no evidence that Theon knew Mance's true identity, or that Theon revealed it to him. For Tycho, a logical man, to leap to the conclusion that the King Beyond the Wall had been resurrected as a saboteur, rather than suspecting Mors Umber, who is outside the walls, or the northern conspirators already inside Winterfell, is unjustified. He also lacks any magical means to fill these gaps in his understanding. The theory cannot overcome the logistical problems of orchestration. Tycho could not guarantee that his letter would be the first or only news to reach Jon Snow, nor could he prevent it from being swiftly contradicted by other sources. He also has no basis to predict that Jon would react to it by forsaking his vows and marching south. Even if he knew Abel was Mance, he has no way of knowing Jon was personally involved in sending him, rather than Mance acting on his own or via another agent like Melisandre, or that he was specifically sent to rescue Arya rather than to generally carry out sabotage against the Boltons. Finally, key details in the letter lie completely outside of Tycho's knowledge. Val leaves north in Jon 8 A Dance with Dragons, and doesn't return until Jon 10 A Dance with Dragons. Tycho arrives in Jon 9 A Dance with Dragons, with Selyse and Shireen, and is long gone by Jon 10 A Dance with Dragons when Val returns. Tycho left the wall before Val came back, and the Queen's men themselves were unaware of her location. He could not plausibly know to demand her back, because for all he knew, she could have been one of the spearwives inside of Winterfell. In sum, Tycho Nestoris lacked the means to be the author. There is no evidence that Hosteen Frey possesses awareness of recent events at the Wall, such as Mance Rayder's survival, nor of Jon Snow's personal connection to the Winterfell plot. For him to write the letter, an implausible chain of events must occur. Mance must first be captured and broken by the Boltons. This intelligence must then be shared with Hosteen while provoking no action from Ramsay himself, and Hosteen must subsequently choose to act alone. This would require the man who Stannis refers to as Sir Stupid to compose and send the letter in secret, directly contradicting his established role as a loyal, blunt instrument of Bolton authority. While a full motive analysis is beyond this stage, the absence of any credible incentive is particularly glaring in Hosteen's case. A man of his martial disposition gains nothing from an elaborate provocation against the distant Night's Watch. Both his character and his logistical position render the scenario entirely unsupported. If Hosteen was involved, then it was with Ramsay's approval. Therefore, Hosteen Frey can be ruled out as the author beyond a reasonable doubt. Bowen Marsh and his fellow Night's Watch conspirators are not plausible authors of the Pink Letter. As their apparent leader, and the one with the most resources, Marsh serves as the man to analyze. On a practical level, Marsh's position as Lord Steward grants him the requisite means. He's literate, has access to the rookery and writing materials, and we may charitably assume that he could have fabricated pink wax despite the watch's standard black. He has intimate knowledge of the Wall and Jon Snow's character, placing him among the few people who could accurately foresee how a targeted provocation might push Jon into an oath-breaking rage. However, the theory collapses on the letter's requisite knowledge, which lies beyond Marsh's reach. There is no textual evidence in his complaints, counsels, or private thoughts that Marsh ever deduced the Mance Rayder plot. He is wholly ignorant of events inside Winterfell, including Arya's rescue and Theon's nickname of Reek. While he is aware of Jon's isolation from Southern powers, Marsh himself is equally isolated. He similarly has no means to communicate, to acquire the detailed real-time information the letter demands. One workaround is that Marsh saw through Mance Rayder's glamour and figured out the plot. The theory goes that Mance Rayder was not diligent with his glamour, taking off his bones in front of the Night's Watch and speaking with them. While it is true that the Night's Watch could have possibly seen through Mance's glamour, there is no textual evidence to suggest that they did, and there is a difference between a possibility and an occurrence. While it is theoretically possible that an observant brother could have noticed an inconsistency, possibility alone does not constitute proof of an occurrence. For an event to serve as a valid foundation for a theory, the text must provide evidence that it actually happened, whether that's direct or circumstantial. In this case, there is no textual evidence whatsoever to suggest that Marsh or any of his conspirators ever suspected that Mance was alive, let alone uncovered the intricate details of his mission to rescue Arya. Therefore, while we might imagine a scenario where Marsh pieces it together, and the narrative does grant him the opportunity, the story as written on the page does not grant him that insight. Relying on this possibility as a fact amounts to constructing the theory's prerequisite knowledge out of thin air, rather than from the established story on the page. Mance leaves the Wall in Melisandre I, A Dance with Dragons. After this point, he is no longer present for the Watch to observe, meaning any alleged discovery had to occur beforehand. Yet we have explicit textual evidence that no such discovery was made. In that chapter, Melisandre reflects on the glamour's success, confirming the Watch's collective ignorance. There is no hint of suspicion from Marsh or anyone else at the point in time when Mance leaves. Furthermore, the single piece of evidence sometimes cited, Jon's observation in Jon 6, A Dance with Dragons, that Rattle Shirt seems shorter, is a misreading of the text. That moment is not Jon subconsciously seeing through the magic. We have direct access to his brain, and he explicitly dismisses the perception, attributing it to the armor. It's the armor, not the man. Jon's shock at the later reveal proves that he remains completely fooled. If Jon Snow, who interacted with Mance and knew him better than his brothers, never suspected the truth, it is wholly implausible that Bowen Marsh, less involved and possessing no special insight, somehow pieced it together. Therefore, the possibility of Marsh deducing the Mance plot isn't just unsupported, it is actively invalidated by the established narrative timeline and the point of view character testimony. Most important to the Night's Watch theory is that the proposed motive is fundamentally illogical. Portraying the letter as a premeditated step in an assassination plot is convoluted and counterproductive. The historical record indicates Marsh and the conspirators acted in reaction to Jon's speech, a desperate strike against a Lord Commander they believed was destroying the Watch by rallying a wildling army to march south. For them to have authored the letter that provoked what in their view would be a catastrophic mobilization is senseless. It would mean fabricating a crisis designed to make Jon do the thing that they feared most, shattering the Watch's neutrality. It makes no sense for them to have fabricated the letter to make Jon Snow rally a wildling army, against their wishes, to march south, against their wishes, and interfere in the realm of men, against their wishes, to break the neutrality of the Night's Watch, against their wishes. The murder was a response to the letter's consequences. Furthermore, the theory's baseless assumption that the conspirators were acting on a prophecy from Melisandre collapses under scrutiny. Bowen Marsh worships the Seven. The idea that he and his fellow traditionalists would abandon their lifelong faith to obey the cryptic pronouncements of a red priestess that they actively distrust and despise is absurd. There is no textual evidence they believe her claims about prophecy or resurrection. Indeed, all evidence suggests they view her as a dangerous and untrustworthy sorceress. For them to stab their Lord Commander on the word of a red witch hitting the meth pipe based on a power that she has never demonstrated defies every established trait of their characters. Bowen Marsh is crying when he delivers the final blow. This is circumstantial evidence that he's overcome by the tragic necessity of killing Jon Snow to save the Night's Watch. You know, like he literally tells Jon. Crying during the act is inconsistent with a zealot fulfilling the will of God. To accept that Bowen Marsh wrote the pink letter, one must believe in the following sequence of events. First, Marsh saw through Mance Rayder's glamour, despite the complete absence of textual evidence supporting this and the presence of evidence that argues powerfully against it. Second, he then approached or was approached by Melisandre, a red priestess he distrusts, accepting on faith her claim that Jon Snow must die to be resurrected as Azor Ahai, a power that she has never once demonstrated to him or anyone at the Wall. Third, Marsh and his fellow traditionalists, men of the Seven or the Old Gods, abruptly abandoned their lifelong faith for a fanatical belief in this prophecy, trusting the untrustworthy witch enough to plot the murder of their Lord Commander. Fourth, this world-saving conspiracy was maintained in absolute secrecy across multiple Jon Snow chapters with no internal monologue or observed behavior hinting at the profound shift in loyalty or purpose. Fifth, Marsh authored a masterful forgery that mimicked the savage idiom, specific knowledge, and psychological warfare of Ramsay Bolton, a man whose correspondence and character are almost wholly unknown to him and whom he has never met. 6. Marsh acquired detailed real-time intelligence from Winterfell, despite having no plausible source for this information being isolated at the Wall. 7. He then used this impossible knowledge to fabricate a letter designed to provoke the exact catastrophe he sought to prevent, Jon Snow publicly renouncing his neutrality, mobilizing the Wildling army, and marching south. 8. He then successfully planted the letter in the rookery for Clydas to discover, another action for which there is no textual evidence or witness. 9. He then waited passively as his plot succeeded, standing idle during Jon's rallying speech as the very Wildling host he feared was assembled in front of him. Finally, he carried out the murder as a cold, premeditated act of prophetic fulfillment, all while weeping tears that contradict the assured fanaticism required to believe in a guaranteed resurrection. The Night's Watch theory substitutes an elegant, straightforward tragedy with a baroque farce of contradictory motives and impossible knowledge. The theory collapses under the weight of its own improbabilities. Therefore, while Marsh had opportunity and a general desire to oppose Jon, he lacked both the means and motive to be the author of the letter. Queen Selyse is literate with access to writing materials, and we can charitably assume that she has the means to procure pink wax and the means to place the letter in the rookery. Since she's at the Wall, as of Jon 9 A Dance with Dragons, she has knowledge of most of the recent events there. She can be sure that the letter will be the first news that Jon hears, and given her arrogance and sense of propriety, she would probably think that insulting Jon Snow with the letter would provoke him to abandon his oath of neutrality. Selyse also knows that Jon Snow isn't in communication with Stannis or the Northerners at Winterfell. However, like Bowen Marsh, Selyse has no knowledge of events at Winterfell, nor the means to acquire that knowledge, nor of the Mance Rayder plot. Therefore, it's impossible that Selyse wrote the letter. While House Karstark possesses several elements necessary to fabricate the pink letter, including Maester Tybalt, ravens, writing materials, and the Dreadfort's pink wax, a closer examination reveals flaws that definitively rule them out. The Karstarks, who secretly plotted with Ramsay to betray Stannis from inside his own camp, are privy to recent events at the Wall, and would correctly suspect that insufficient lines of communication exist between Jon Snow and Stannis to challenge false claims. As they believe Roose Bolton holds Winterfell securely, they would also assume that no other Northern Lord could safely contradict a letter purporting to come from him. However, their plan contains fatal flaws, primarily concerning the mechanics of Raven communication and their physical isolation. The Karstarks brought only 3 ravens to their camp. As confirmed in Theon 1, The Winds of Winter, one was already used to send a map of Stannis' position to Winterfell. The remaining 2 ravens are also trained to fly to Winterfell, not to the Dreadfort or Castle Black. The Karstarks had no means to send a raven to Jon Snow. Furthermore, this communication barrier operates both ways. Even if Winterfell wanted to reply, it could not send ravens to a war camp, and any rider would be intercepted by Stannis' forces, or Mor's Umber. The Karstarks were operating in an informational vacuum. This isolation creates a second insurmountable problem: knowledge. Cut off from Winterfell, the Karstarks could not have learned of Mance Rayder's survival, his mission from Jon Snow, his presence inside Winterfell, or the 6 Spearwives. The Karstarks couldn't possibly have been in communication with Winterfell, therefore they cannot possibly know about Mance Rayder. Crucially, they remain unaware of Theon's escape until the pair arrive at Stannis' camp. Without this intelligence, fabricating the letter's specific taunts would be an impossible guess. They would also have no way of knowing if Jon was in secret contact with Mance, making such a bluff likely to expose their letter as a fraud. And we know that Theon's escape takes them by surprise, as evidenced in Theon 1, The Winds of Winter. So they didn't know about it ahead of time. In terms of sending a letter as soon as Theon arrives, that is also ruled out by the fact that Stannis immediately intervenes, and they have no more opportunities to send ravens. Therefore, while the Karstarks could compose a threatening letter, they lack both the means to deliver it and the information inside the pink letter. It's firmly not the Karstarks. Having methodically eliminated most of our original 29 suspects, we have narrowed the field to the final 7. These remaining candidates are the usual suspects, people who, at a first glance, might be the credible authors of the pink letter. This refined list allows us to focus our analysis on the most compelling possibilities with deeper scrutiny. In the following section, we will examine each suspect in detail: Theon Greyjoy, Melisandre, Stannis, Roose Bolton, Ramsay Bolton, the Northern Conspiracy, and Mance Rayder. Theon Greyjoy possesses significant portions of the knowledge required for the pink letter. He's literate, has intimate first-hand knowledge of the events inside Winterfell, and is painfully aware of his Reek identity. Furthermore, having been raised with Jon Snow as a ward of Winterfell, he understands how to provoke him. There are also some peculiar language choices that seem to implicate Theon as the author. The author uses Reek to identify Theon, instead of naming him Theon, despite everyone in Winterfell knowing that he's Theon. In Theon 1, The Winds of Winter, Theon tells Stannis that he wants his bride back, he wants his Reek. The letter uses similar language: I want my bride back, and I want my Reek. However, his candidacy collapses under scrutiny. There is no textual evidence in Dance or the released Winds chapter that Theon knows Abel is Mance Rayder. Similarly, he has no knowledge that Mance's mission was specifically to rescue Arya, let alone that Jon Snow authorized it. He is entirely unaware of recent developments at the Wall, including Val's presence. Second, Theon lacks all practical means to compose and send the letter. He has no access to ravens, parchment, ink, or sealing wax. His movements within Winterfell are restricted, and he's under constant surveillance. Entering the Rookery unchallenged would be impossible. His POV chapters in A Dance with Dragons provide a complete account of his escape, offering no opportunity to write the letter or internal monologue suggesting that he wrote the letter before he jumped. And after he jumped, we know that he did not pack these items with him, hammering home the point that he had no opportunity to write this letter. Finally, the theory that he wrote the letter under duress, such as by Stannis Baratheon once he's captured, is rendered implausible by his situation. Stannis has shackled Theon to a wall and intends to execute him, and shows no indication of having collaborated with him on such a scheme. Stannis doesn't even ask about Abel or his washerwomen. Therefore, while Theon Greyjoy might be a source of intelligence for the author, he can be definitively ruled out as the author. Melisandre appears a plausible candidate on the surface. She's literate, conspired in the Mance Rayder scheme, and has magical foresight. Deeper examination, however, reveals fatal gaps in her knowledge, motive, and means that would definitively exclude her. To be the author, Melisandre would need to know facts that she demonstrably does not. First, she directed Mance towards Carhold, or Last Hearth, not Winterfell, as shown in Melisandre 1, A Dance with Dragons. Alice Karstark's unhindered journey to the Wall confirms that Mance never intercepted her, as we learn in Jon 9, A Dance with Dragons, leaving Mance's actions and whereabouts between leaving Castle Black and his arrival at Winterfell a complete mystery. There are 3 entire POV chapters at the Wall between Mance leaving Castle Black and Alice arriving, a massive gap where Mance's whereabouts and actions are totally unexplained. Melisandre has no subsequent information placing him at Winterfell. While Arya's marriage to Ramsay was publicly announced, Melisandre has no way of knowing if Mance, operating in the wilderness and deliberately avoiding contact, learned of it, or, even if he did, whether he would adapt his mission accordingly and partake in a mission that would likely fail and result in a horrible death. Second, her visions are too unreliable and vague to supply the letter's specific claims. She misread a vision of Arya arriving at the Wall, which turned out to be Alice Karstark. There's no textual evidence that her flames revealed Theon's escape, Theon's Reek identity, or Mance's capture. When directly asked about Stannis and Mance in Jon 10 A Dance with Dragons, she admits to seeing nothing. You see fools in your fire, but no hint of Stannis? When I search for him, all I see is snow. And what of Mance? Is he lost as well? What do your fires show? The same, I fear. Only snow. Therefore, we have textual confirmation that Melisandre has no visions of Mance Rayder or Stannis, and can't see what they're up to, which means she cannot be updated on their situations via magical means. There's no evidence that her visions revealed Faria and Theon's escape, Theon's Reek identity, or Mance's capture. While she sometimes receives unexpected visions, such as whispers of Jon Snow in Melisandre 1, there is no indication she saw or heard Reek. Melisandre also has no way of knowing that Jon Snow will be so upset by the insults in the letter that he'll march south. She hasn't spent enough time with Jon to know him that well, and her visions of Jon Snow are filled with warnings of his death, not of him marching south. You would think that if she had seen a vision of Jon marching south, she would be boasting of it to his face, misinterpreting it as a sign that Stannis will win him over, and Jon will follow the true king eventually. Her general caution in interpreting and sharing visions, deflecting Devon Seaworth by saying that she has seen, quote, much and more in A Dance with Dragons Melisandre 1, contradicts the confident, detailed assertions in the Pink Letter. Regarding motive, Melisandre's own POV chapters explicitly contradict a desire to harm Jon Snow. She perceives him as crucial, constantly warns him of danger, and actively works to keep him alive, thinking, quote, it was Jon Snow she needed in A Dance with Dragons Melisandre 1. Theories that she wrote the letter to manipulate or sacrifice him rely on speculative assumptions unsupported by her intentions, as revealed by the fact that we, the readers, have access to her brain. We know that she's been seeing Jon Snow in her flames for a while, and she keeps seeing that he is surrounded by death, that he's under threat. Her response is clear. She constantly reminds him to keep his direwolf close by, that he's in danger, surrounded by daggers. She's trying to keep him alive. She needs Jon Snow and wants to use him. Furthermore, Melisandre lacks the practical means to execute such a forgery. While she could likely get her hands on writing materials and pink wax, she has no credible access to the rookery to plant the letter for Clydas to find. The men of the Night's Watch distrust her, and Jon Snow himself remains deeply skeptical of her motives. It is highly unlikely she would be granted unsupervised access. Moreover, she possesses incomplete knowledge of Jon's correspondence. From her perspective, the Watch receives frequent letters from northern houses. Jon has already been in communication with the Boltons, so why not with Manderley or Mormont, who sent letters to Stannis at the Wall? A forgery would risk immediate exposure if their claims contradicted her letter. She also has no way of verifying the letter's claim that Mance Rayder has been captured and displayed in a cage, which means she cannot know whether Mance himself could expose the forgery. Most importantly, Melisandre has no reliable channel of communication with the key players at Winterfell to fill the gaps in her knowledge. We have direct textual proof that communication with Stannis in the field is slow and uncertain. Stannis cannot be sent birds directly in the field. The ravens have no homing instinct to Stannis' improvised camp in the field. This aspect of communications is well established by this point in the series. Melisandre cannot possibly be communicating with Stannis directly via Raven, and even if she was, it would be seriously delayed. In Jon 9 A Dance with Dragons, Jon sends a warning of Arnulf Karstark's treachery to Deepwood Motte, but Jon doesn't know that Stannis has already marched towards Winterfell, stopping at the Crofters' village. Stannis does not receive Jon's warning until Theon won the Winds of Winter, acting upon it immediately. This significant delay, at least 5 Jon chapters or more, proves that neither Melisandre nor anyone at Castle Black can know Stannis' real-time situation or coordinate with him. Jon Snow is dead by the time that Stannis receives the letter. Stannis makes a comment that he'll pay Jon back for the heads up, not knowing that Jon is dead. If Melisandre were in communication with Stannis, then he would know that Jon was dead. Since he doesn't, it stands to reason that Melisandre isn't in communication with Stannis, on top of all of the other reasons that I've already stated. Riders are also impossible. As Jon notes in Jon 10 A Dance with Dragons, only 2 days' ride south of Castle Black, the King's Road was said to be impassable. Tycho Nestoris was only able to pass the blockage because he rode before the blockage was in place. Therefore, the idea that Melisandre could know the detailed outcomes of battles, escapes, and captives hundreds of miles away in a severe snowstorm without magic and without ravens or riders in a timely manner is impossible. She cannot coordinate with Stannis, Theon, or Mance Rayder from afar, and cooperating with someone like Bowen Marsh doesn't fill these gaps. It only introduces further questions and complications. Finally, the letter's intended effect, to provoke Jon into breaking his vows and marching south with an army, contradicts Melisandre's understanding of his character. She's observed his steadfast commitment to duty, which has even resisted her own magical and alchemical seduction. Her goal has been to manipulate him into her service and produce shadow babies. For her to bank on him abandoning the Watch based on insults alone would be a reckless gamble with a crucial asset, an action her cautious nature does not support. In conclusion, the theory of Melisandre's authorship is thoroughly debunked. It requires her to possess knowledge she lacks, to act against her stated motives, to coordinate with others in a logistically impossible manner, and to execute a logistically improbable forgery. Therefore, Melisandre must be definitively excluded as an author of the Pink Letter, with overwhelming evidence. Could Stannis Baratheon have written the Pink Letter? In short, no. He is literate and has the material means to send the letter. Per Theon 1 The Winds of Winter, his ink has frozen over, but that's nothing a bit of fire can't fix. And he knows about recent events at the Wall. However, Stannis does not have the requisite knowledge to compose the Pink Letter. On his own, Stannis is unaware of Theon's Reek identity, his escape with Arya, or the Mance Rayder mission. Interrogating Theon would only partially fill these gaps. Theon could supply details like the Reek nickname and the Spearwives, but he can't explain the core element of Mance's involvement, and he knows nothing of that plot, or Mance's identity. For Stannis to be the author, he would have to possess prior knowledge of Mance's mission. Either he knew all along, or that Melisandre is secretly in communication with him. The first possibility, that he knew all along, is contradicted by the text. In Melisandre 1 A Dance with Dragons, Melisandre directs Mance towards Carhold, or Last Hearth, not Winterfell. Mance's decision to go to Winterfell was an adaptation made in the field, a development that neither Melisandre nor Stannis could have foreseen. The mission, at the time it was invented, did not involve Winterfell. Even if Stannis knew about the plot ahead of time, there's no way he could have known that Mance would be at Winterfell, or that he would use Theon. And Melisandre herself sees only snow when searching for Stannis and Mance in her flames, as shown in Jon 10 A Dance with Dragons. Furthermore, there would be no reason for Stannis to assume that Abel was Mance Rayder. As stated in the section on Melisandre, Stannis would have every reason to believe that Mors and his company had saboteurs inside the castle. The second possibility, coordination with Melisandre, is also logistically impossible, as previously established. Communication with Stannis in the field is slow and unreliable at best, proven by the significant delay in him receiving Jon's warning about Arnulf Karstark in Theon 1 The Winds of Winter, when Jon Snow sent it in Jon 9 A Dance with Dragons. Furthermore, if Stannis were the author, he would be taking a monumental risk based on incomplete information. He would have no way of knowing whether Mance had already communicated with Jon, which would expose the letter as a forgery. Nor could he be certain his letter would arrive before contradictory reports from Winterfell or other northern lords. The logistics alone make authorship implausible based on timeliness. The Crofters' village is 3 days from Winterfell. Both Stannis and Roose Bolton agree on this in separate chapters, accounting for Theon's interrogation by Mors Umber, his journey with Tycho Nestoris, his interrogation by Stannis, the physical inscription of the letter, and the Raven's flight to Castle Black. A minimum of 5 days would pass between the events at Winterfell and a letter being sent. 3 days travel, 1 day writing and interrogating, and 1 day for the Raven to fly equals 5 days in the most optimistic timeline. In these circumstances, a practical-minded man like Stannis would never assume that his letter would be the first report to reach the Wall, undermining the letter's entire purpose of provoking an immediate reaction. This logistical impossibility is compounded by Stannis' isolation. He possesses no secret channel to Mance Rayder inside of Winterfell, nor is he aware of the northern conspiracy playing out around him. Wyman Manderly, the king's mouth twisted in contempt. Lord too fat to sit a horse, too fat to come to me, yet he comes to Winterfell. Too fat to bend the knee and swear me his sword, yet now he wields that sword for Bolton. I sent my onion lord to treat with him, and Lord Too Fat butchered him, and mounted his head and hands on the walls of White Harbor for Freys to gloat over. And the phrase, "Has the Red Wedding been forgotten?" His thoughts reveal a deep suspicion and hatred of lords like Wyman Manderly, whom he views as a hypocritical Bolton loyalist. He is entirely unaware of their true allegiances, and was caught by surprise by the presence of Mors Umber. Stannis operates in a vacuum. He cannot possibly have the coordinated insider knowledge the Pink Ladder displays. Finally, the letter's crude provocation conflicts with Stannis' history with Jon Snow. Stannis has tested Jon's resolve directly, pressuring him with offers of legitimacy and command. He has repeatedly called Jon bastard to his face as a simple fact. He even did so during their first meeting after the battle beneath the wall in Jon 11, A Storm of Swords. In Stannis' experience, Jon is a man of duty who withstands pressure. It is therefore wildly out of character for Stannis to suddenly believe that vulgar insults and taunts, insults which he himself delivered to Jon, would succeed in making Jon break his vows. In conclusion, Stannis lacks the necessary knowledge and faces insurmountable logistical barriers to being the author of the Pink Letter. We have proved beyond a reasonable doubt that it was not him. While Roose Bolton possesses the logistical capability and the inside knowledge of Winterfell's events to be the plausible author of the Pink Letter, significant flaws in this theory arise from gaps in his knowledge and from questionable motives. Logistically speaking, Roose is a compelling candidate. He controls Winterfell, commands the necessary resources to send the letter, and could dispatch it before anyone else can. He likely suspects Stannis can't communicate with Jon to contradict his claims, controls the Rookery, and believes no message could reach Jon without his knowledge. He is also directly aware of the murders within the castle, and his men could have easily connected the Spearwives to Abel in the aftermath, identifying him as their leader. However, a critical gap in knowledge undermines this possibility. For Roose to be the author, he would need to know that Abel is specifically Mance Rayder, sent by Jon Snow to steal Arya. While Mance's capture is implied, it is not confirmed. Without extracting this specific intelligence, through torture or otherwise, Roose lacks the requisite information. Jon's direct involvement, Mance's mission, and the whereabouts of Melisandre, Selyse, and Shireen at the Wall. The text confirms that everyone in Winterfell, from Theon to common soldiers, believes that Stannis and his entourage are camped outside the walls, not the men of Castle Black, who are hundreds of miles away. In Theon 1, A Dance of Dragons, Abel tells Theon that, quote, Lord Stannis is outside the walls, and not far by the sound of it. All we need do is reach him. Theon himself believes Stannis is outside, as do the Bolton men. The perception is shared by all of Winterfell. Quote, and a name passed from the lips of each man to the next, written in small white puffs of breath. Stannis, they whispered. Stannis is here. Stannis is come. Stannis, Stannis, Stannis. Given this prevailing belief, Roose's most logical conclusion upon discovering the escape would be that Stannis' agents successfully infiltrated Winterfell and now hold Theon and Arya. Attributing the plot to Jon Snow and the distant wall makes little strategic sense from his perspective. Jon is a minor player. Stannis is the immediate existential threat at his gates. Even if Mance were captured and revealed the details, Roose would have no reason to believe that Jon Snow, of all people, randomly sent the King Beyond the Wall, who is publicly believed to be dead, on a secret mission to rescue Arya Stark in violation of the Night's Watch's neutrality. Stannis remains the more logical candidate. If Mance was not captured, then Roose lacks the requisite knowledge altogether. He would not know that Mance was sent by Jon, that the mission specifically targeted Arya, and that Selyse and Shireen are at the wall, or anything about Mance's son or Val. He would also not know Melisandre's location. The men in Winterfell assume she's with Stannis. Quote, Lord Stannis might be warmer than we know. His sorceress can summon fire. Might be her red god can melt these snows. Theon's leap from the walls to reach Stannis only reinforces this. From Roose's viewpoint, Stannis now has Theon and Arya, and the operation was clearly the work of Stannis, not Jon Snow, who's hundreds of miles away. Further complicating the theory is the question of motive. Roose Bolton disapproves of Ramsay's overt psychopathy. Why would he leave a paper trail of sadism with Jon Snow? Moreover, why would he deliberately provoke Jon to march south with a wildling army? Roose has likely heard rumors of the wildlings crossing the wall and would know that Jon could command them. Inviting thousands of wildlings to swell Stannis' ranks outside of Winterfell is strategically unsound. It would also be politically foolish for Roose to inform Jon, of all people, that Arya has escaped, or to lie about Stannis' death in terms easily contradicted with minimal reflection. Additionally, Roose has no reason to assume that Jon Snow would be so incensed by being called a bastard that he would abandon his vows. Finally, Roose's behavior in Winterfell suggests a desire to suppress problems, not to broadcast them. In A Dance with Dragons, A Ghost of Winterfell, Sir Aenys Frey's squire is found dead in the old castle Lichyard. Then, before the day was done, a crossbowman sworn to the flints turned up in the stables with a broken skull. Then, after the stables collapse under the weight of the snow, Yellow Dick, one of Ramsay's men, is found dead, with his manhood cut off and shoved into his mouth. Dead outside the kitchens, buried up to his neck in a snowdrift. Roose Bolton orders the men to burn the body, and for his men to be quiet about it. Quote, I'll not have this tale spread, end quote. But it spreads nonetheless, because of Ramsay Bolton. After several mysterious deaths, he orders a body burned and insists it be kept quiet. The pink letter, by contrast, is deliberately provocative and discloses a lot of information, far from the peaceful land, a quiet people that Roose prefers. These tactics are inconsistent with Roose's demonstrated preference for containment and quiet control. Therefore, while Roose Bolton is logistically positioned to have written the pink letter, the theory fails to withstand scrutiny. The critical gaps in his knowledge, specifically regarding Jon Snow's direct involvement, Mance Rayder's true identity and mission, and the location of key figures at the wall, render him an improbable author. From his perspective, Stannis Baratheon remains the logical mastermind behind the infiltration of Winterfell. The pieces of the puzzle are coming together. After sifting through candidates, a clear picture is emerging. Responsibility for the pink letter rests with one of three parties. Each suspect implies a completely different scenario for what is really happening at Winterfell. Now we determine which one wrote the letter, and why. Ramsay Bolton, the Northern Conspiracy, or Mance Rayder. If the pink letter was genuinely written by Ramsay Bolton, it requires him to possess an extraordinary amount of specific knowledge from both Winterfell and the Wall. A detailed examination of his knowledge, the letter's form, and his motive reveals significant problems for Ramsay as the author. Operating from Winterfell, Ramsay possesses the tools and basic intelligence to write and send a threatening letter. He has access to maesters, ravens, writing materials, and his distinctive pink wax. He would know that his letter would be Jon Snow's first news of the escape. Through plotting with Arnulf Karstark, he would suspect that communication between Stannis and Jon is fractured, and controlling the Rookery, he would know that Theon and the Northern Lords cannot immediately contradict his claims. Upon discovering the escape, he would quickly deduce the involvement of the 6 Spearwives, 3 of whom are killed, and would, of course, know the nickname Reek. However, Ramsay independently lacks several critical pieces of information. He doesn't know that Abel is Mance Rayder, the specifics of Mance's mission, or that Jon Snow sent him. He is also unaware of Melisandre's presence at the Wall, the location of Selyse and Shireen, or the existence of Mance's son and Val. Some of these gaps can only be explained by capturing and interrogating Mance Rayder, since none of these gaps can be filled by correspondence with Arnulf Karstark. Ramsay can't send any messages to him, and Arnulf only sent a map, nor with the Wall itself. To write the pink letter, Ramsay must have broken Mance, extracting a confession of a rescue plot and a full intelligence briefing on Wall politics and Jon Snow's inner circle, a process that would take considerable time, even under normal circumstances, and likely longer with Mance Rayder's resistance. Mance Rayder is a tough man who's lived north of the Wall for decades, contending with the others and wildling infighting. To assume that he would break instantly or confess everything is not an assumption that can be made without supporting evidence. The letter demands highly specific peripheral details like Mance's son and Val, assets that offer Ramsay no strategic benefit and seems unlikely to be prioritized during enhanced interrogation. The text confirms that Winterfell believes Stannis is outside of the walls. In A Ghost of Winterfell, the name on everyone's lips is Stannis. Theon's desperate leap is a final attempt to reach Stannis. Given this universal belief, Ramsay's most logical conclusion upon discovering the escape is that Stannis' agents successfully infiltrated Winterfell. Attributing the plot to the distant Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, a minor player compared to the king literally besieging him, and who Ramsay has no reason to believe he has any quarrel with, makes little sense. Even if Mance confessed that Jon Snow sent him, Ramsay would have no reason to believe him. He would have no reason to believe that Jon Snow would dispatch the publicly deceased King Beyond the Wall on a secret mission. Stannis remains the obvious and immediate mastermind. Furthermore, the letter's demands are foolish. Asking Jon Snow to come south is an open invitation for the Lord Commander to arrive with a wildling army, accomplishing nothing other than swelling Stannis' ranks. This contradicts Ramsay's previous caution towards Jon. In his earlier authenticated letter, A Dance with Dragons Jon 6, Ramsay carefully styled himself Lord of the Hornwood to Jon, avoiding the title of Lord of Winterfell that he sent to Asha Greyjoy in The Wayward Bride, A Dance with Dragons, a copy of the same letter. So Ramsay Bolton went out of his way to change his ordinary styling as Lord of Winterfell in these letters to Lord of the Hornwood specifically to Jon to avoid provoking him. The pink letter's aggressive use of true-born Lord of Winterfell represents a dramatic slap in the face. Ramsay's unexplained change in style leads into the question of forgery. The physical details of the pink letter contradict Ramsay's established habits. Compare it to the authenticated letter sent to Asha Greyjoy. My lady, a bird from Barrowtown. He thrust the parchment at her as if he could not wait to be rid of it. It was tightly rolled and sealed with a button of hard pink wax. Barrowtown. Asha tried to recall who ruled Barrowtown. Some northern lord, no friend of mine, and that seal. The Boltons of the Dreadfort went into battle beneath pink banners spattered with little drops of blood. It only stood to reason that they would be using pink sealing wax as well. This is poison that I hold, she thought. I ought to burn it. Instead, she cracked the seal. A scrap of leather fluttered down into her lap. When she read the dry brown words, her black mood grew blacker still. Dark wings, dark words. The ravens never brought glad tidings. The last message sent to Deepwood had been from Stannis Baratheon, demanding homage. This was worse. The Northmen have taken Moat Cailin. The bastard of Bolton? Ramsay Bolton, Lord of Winterfell, he signs himself. But there are other names as well. Lady Dustin, Lady Serwyn, and 4 Risewells had appended their own signatures beneath his. Beside them was drawn a crude giant, the mark of some umber. Those were done in maester's ink, made of soot and coal tar, but the message above was scrawled in brown in a huge, spiky hand. It spoke of the fall of Moat Cailin, of the triumphant return of the Warden of the North to his domains, and of a marriage soon to be made. The first words were, "I write this letter in the blood of Ironmen." The last, "I send you each a piece of prince. Linger in my lands and share his fate." This letter follows a clear protocol. Ramsay's huge spiky hand for the body and his signature, co-marks from the other northern lords done by a maester, and a seal pressed with his signet ring. The pink letter lacks every single one of these authenticating marks. The wax is mentioned, but there is a smear rather than a button, and no description of a signet ring impression to seal the scroll or on the letter itself. The signet ring is the main authenticating mark of the time. Ramsay uses it before with both Jon and Asha. Why wouldn't he use it now? The lack of signet ring strongly suggests a forgery. To understand why, one must appreciate the role of the signet ring in a medieval setting. The signet ring was the main tool for authenticating official documents, the equivalent of a digital signature and notary stamp combined. The unique design pressed into the wax verified the sender's identity and the document's integrity, making forgery difficult. If a letter arrived with a broken wax seal, that would indicate that someone had opened the letter, indicating the possibility of tampering with the contents of the letter. A letter from a lord without this mark would be viewed as suspect, unofficial, or possibly a trap. Ramsay Bolton, raised as a lord's son, meticulously follows this protocol in his verified correspondence. His authenticated letter to Asha Greyjoy in The Wayward Bride and to Jon Snow in Jon 6: A Dance with Dragons demonstrates the full formula. The letter in Jon 6: A Dance with Dragons includes all of the expected layers of authentication, the distinctive pink wax seal on the scroll itself, the physical impression of his signet ring inside, his personal signature in his unique handwriting, and co-signatures from allied northern lords to lend it collective political weight and authenticity. Note also that Ramsay Bolton claims to have sent scraps of human skin to all of the lords, but he didn't send it in the one to Jon Snow, further suggesting that he is going out of his way not to provoke Jon Snow. In contrast to all of the authenticating marks in the letter that Jon receives in Jon 6: A Dance with Dragons, by contrast, there are no supporting marks from Lady Dustin, the Risewells, or anyone else in the pink letter. And there is no distinctive handwriting. The letter appears in a single hand, with no mention of the huge spiky hand that characterizes Ramsay's personal writing. Finally, Ramsay signs not as the cautious Lord of the Hornwood like he used with Jon in Jon 6: A Dance with Dragons, or even the bolder Lord of Winterfell that he used when trying to provoke Asha, but the true-born Lord of Winterfell. The pink letter violates the standard protocols of authentication. There would be no reason not to include the signet mark and the signature, even with a provocation, as shown by Ramsay using them in his provocation against Asha. The most plausible explanation for the absence of Ramsay's signature and seal, along with co-signatures, is that the author could not obtain them. And the most plausible explanation of the author being unable to access Ramsay's ring and signature is that Ramsay did not write the letter. The theory that Ramsay wrote the letter rests on several unstable assumptions about the immediate aftermath of the escape. It assumes that Ramsay survived the chaos, that Mance was captured alive rather than fighting to the death that he says he will on multiple occasions, and that Ramsay had the time to conduct a prolonged interrogation. It ignores potential wildcards like Squirrel, the spearwife hidden in Ramsay's bed waiting to assassinate him, or Wyman Manderley seizing the moment to strike. In the frenzied hours after the escape, with a hostile army believed to be at the gates and enemies within the walls, the orderly extraction of detailed intelligence and composition of such a letter seems improbable. There are other linguistic complications. The term Black Crows functions as a distinct cultural marker within the text of the letter. Black Crows is used exclusively by free folk as a derogatory term for the Night's Watch. Asha refers to the Watch as the Black Crows in Bran 5 of Game of Thrones, calls Mance Rayder an old Black Crow in Bran 6 of Game of Thrones, and uses the term again in Bran 2, A Clash of Kings. Craster dismissively calls the Rangers at his keep Black Crows in Jon 3, A Clash of Kings. Ygritte calls Jon Snow a brave black crow and groups Northmen under the term in Jon 6, A Clash of Kings. Rattleshirt refers to Jon as the Black Crow in Jon 8, A Clash of Kings. And Mance Rayder himself states, "The Black Crow is a tricksy bird, that's so," in Jon 1, A Storm of Swords. Harma Dogshead remarks, "What fools these black crows be," when Jon tries to evade Mance's questioning in Jon 2, A Storm of Swords. And Tormund Giantsbane boasts that wildling warriors are worth 6 black crows in Jon 12, A Dance with Dragons. The sole exception is Jon Snow himself, who uses the term ironically when entreating with the Free Folk. The only other instance of the phrase in the entire series is within the Pink Letter. For Ramsay Bolton, a lord of the Dreadfort, to employ this specific piece of wildling vernacular is highly suspect. For Ramsay Bolton to be the author of the Pink Letter, he must have overcome a series of unlikely hurdles. Obtaining knowledge that he has no logical way of possessing, abandoning his previous strategic caution, especially when Roose Bolton would be able to stop him, disregarding his letter-writing protocols for literally no reason, adopting foreign terminology, wanting Jon Snow to come south with the Wildling army and empower his enemy, perceive a quarrel with Jon Snow where he previously perceived none and actively tried to avoid one, and surviving a castle ripe with enemies. Cumulatively, these problems undermine the case for Ramsay being the author of the Pink Letter, strongly pointing to another source. The Northern Conspiracy, a secret alliance of northern houses including Wyman Manderley and Barbary Dustin, ranks among the most popular candidates for writing the Pink Letter. Superficially, they possess several compelling qualifications. Collectively, they have the physical means to write such a letter, and access to the necessary materials. Furthermore, they would have immediate awareness of Theon's escape, and the identity of Reek, as well as the involvement of the 6 Spearwives if the escape fails. As northern lords, they might also guess that Jon Snow would be provoked by the letter's insults, although that's a tenuous supposition. However, significant logistical and informational gaps severely undermine this theory. The conspiracy's most critical limitation is the lack of access to key information from the Wall, and the letter contains specific details known only to someone with intimate knowledge of Mance Rayder. Assuming that the letter was sent after Mance is captured, it is highly improbable that Roose or Ramsay Bolton would allow northern lords, whom they already suspect of disloyalty, access to a high-value prisoner like Mance Rayder during enhanced interrogation. A good strategy would involve using secret questioning, using Mance's revelations to test potentially disloyal lords, a tactic that Roose is already trying to use. One proposed workaround suggests that northern allies at the Wall, such as the Flints, could have fed information south, but this introduces another fatal flaw. Roose and Ramsay Bolton control Winterfell's rookery and monitor it closely. Any attempt to secretly receive intelligence from the Wall would risk exposing the entire conspiracy and endangering every member's life. While not technically impossible, this scenario ventures beyond reasonable doubt into the realm of unlikely supposition. The conspirators lack secure access to ravens. Sending any direct message to or from Jon Snow or Stannis would threaten to collapse their carefully laid plans. Given the tight security in Winterfell, they would have to orchestrate a distraction large enough to safely use the rookery undetected, exposing them to more risk and potentially killing them all. Therefore, upon examination, the Northern Conspiracy is unlikely to have been the author of the letter. Mance Rayder stands as the final suspect for writing the Pink Letter. He fulfills many of the requirements. Mance possesses intimate knowledge of the situation at the Wall, having been a central figure there, and is fully aware of the details of his own mission to Winterfell to rescue Arya. From his time posing as Abel the Bard, he has spoken to Theon and knows about Reek, and would know of his 6 Spearwives involved in the escape, and other details of his own plan. From their interactions beyond the Wall, Mance would understand Jon Snow's temperament well enough to anticipate that he might be provoked into rash action, breaking his vows to march south. It is even plausible that Mance anticipated his own capture, or is deliberately lying about it within the letter to goad Jon into action, knowing that he won't contradict his own words. And he would know that Jon Snow is not speaking to Theon, Stannis, or the Northern Lords in Winterfell, reducing the risk that his forgery would be contradicted. Despite these persuasive points, the theory that Mance acted alone collapses because of the practical needs of sending the letter. First, there is no textual evidence that Mance Rayder can read or write, and significantly, circumstantial evidence suggests he can't. Mance was a former ranger in the Night's Watch, a role that doesn't require literacy. By Mormont's time, literacy at the Wall is so rare that practically everyone who can read or write is promoted to steward, not ranger. In Tyrion III, A Game of Thrones, Lord Commander Mormont notes the extreme scarcity of literate men at the Wall, stating, quote, "I have perhaps 20 who can read, and even fewer who can think or plan or lead." Given the rarity, it seems like the sort of thing that Corran would have mentioned to Jon to illustrate that Mance is clever and dangerous. Literacy is a notable trait in this setting, one that would likely be signaled if Mance possessed it. The leap from potential basic literacy of a few words to the ability to compose the Pink Letter's elaborate psychologically manipulative forgery is a vast gap. In the context of Westeros, we must assume illiteracy until proven otherwise. Second, Mance lacks the physical resources to produce and send the letter. He would require access to parchment, ink, a quill, and the distinctive pink sealing wax, materials not readily available to a captive bard. Most importantly, he would need to use the Rookery, which is under tight control of the Boltons. As Bael the Singer, Mance would have no plausible pretext to access it, and attempting to do so would almost certainly result in his immediate capture or execution. He also lacks the specific knowledge of which raven flies to Castle Black, information held by the Maesters. The timing of the letter's dispatch presents another contradiction. When last seen, Mance is performing at the High Table, leaving no opportunity to send a letter after Theon's escape. One could argue that he wrote it beforehand, gambling on the mission's outcome. While this aligns with Mance's bold risk-taking nature and his willingness to sacrifice his expendable companions, it does not solve the fundamental problems of materials and access. Every member of his party was engaged in the escape plot, and none had the opportunity to secretly commandeer the Rookery. Finally, as an aside, it's necessary to address a competing theory. Some have speculated, through a complex chain of conjecture, that Mance Rayder is using a glamour to pose as Ramsay Bolton. This theory is invalidated by the straightforward fact that Mance and Ramsay are explicitly depicted as being in the same room at the same time in Theon I, A Dance with Dragons. Since one person cannot physically be in two places at once, this interpretation is unsustainable. In conclusion, while Mance Rayder possesses the motive, insider knowledge, and psychological insight to be a tantalizing suspect, he demonstrably lacks the practical means, the proven literacy to craft the document, and the access to the resources required to send it. Therefore, the theory that he wrote the Pink Letter alone is ultimately unsustainable. The proposition that Mance Rayder collaborated with the Northern Conspiracy presents a compelling solution to many problems surrounding the letter. This theory aligns with the known facts and effectively addresses the critical issues of means, motive, and opportunity. If true, it would mean that the letter was a calculated piece of political theater designed to manipulate Jon Snow into decisive action, ultimately delivering him to Winterfell. The practical requirements for creating the letter are met by this alliance. The Northern Conspiracy, comprising lords like Wyman Manderly along with Maester Henley, would possess direct access to literacy, ravens, writing materials, and the distinctive pink wax. They would also know which raven was designated for Castle Black. By writing or dictating the letter's contents ahead of time, Mance could provide crucial details, his own identity and mission, the alias of Reek, the escape of Arya Stark, while his northern allies ensured its timely dispatch. Sending the letter before the escape was executed would guarantee that it reaches Jon as the first unchallenged account of events, a narrative that could not immediately be contradicted by Stannis, Theon, or the conspirators themselves. This collaboration explains the letter's insider knowledge and strategic purpose. Collectively, Mance and the conspirators would be aware of the impending escape, Mance's presence and his mission in Winterfell, the ongoing conflicts at the Wall, and Jon Snow's temperament. This knowledge allows the letter to be calibrated to provoke Jon to break his vows in a rage and march south. For the Northern Conspiracy, the goals are to rescue Arya, eliminate the Bolton regime, and restore a Stark to Winterfell. The letter serves these aims by prompting Jon to bring a wildling army south as reinforcements, while also ensuring that he secures assets like Mance's son and Val for his own cause. For Mance, the letter guarantees a rescue attempt for himself and his spearwives, while carving out a future for his people in the aftermath. Both parties want to see Ramsay Bolton neutralized, and a Stark, preferably Jon Snow, in control of the North. Logistically, the theory elegantly explains how the escape and the letter's dispatch could be coordinated. Mance could orchestrate a distraction with the escape, while his northern allies simultaneously create chaos, such as inciting the Frey-Manderly feud, to draw guards away and facilitate the operation. With the Northmen at each other's throats, fugitives on the run, and killer spearwives on the loose, nobody would be thinking to check the rookery. A trusted agent within the conspiracy could then release a pre-written raven. Every element comes into sync: the distraction, the escape, and the triggering of Jon Snow's intervention. The hypothesis that Mance Rayder and the Northern Conspiracy co-authored the Pink Letter resolves every puzzle piece the text presents. It provides a unified explanation for the letter's creation, its specific intelligence, its impeccable timing, and its strategic objectives. The remaining task, therefore, is to examine the evidence within A Dance with Dragons that demonstrates such an alliance existed. Winterfell is under heavy guard and surveillance, and Lord Bolton is able to question his guards to figure out where everyone has been, if he suspects them. The Great Keep has 6 guards posted at all times, and Roose even posts guards at the kitchen door, as stated in Theon 1, A Dance with Dragons. Any conspiracy operating within such a fortress would require extensive coordination. The first indication of coordination between the Northern Conspiracy and Mance Rayder happens at the Wall, before Ramsay's wedding. In Melisandre 1, A Dance with Dragons, Mance is sent with his spearwives towards Long Lake, not Winterfell. He then vanishes entirely. Alice Karstark, fleeing through the same territory, never encounters him. This gap in his journey coincides with the march of Mor's Crowfoot Umber, who is known to be marching an army from Long Lake down the King's Road to besiege Winterfell from the north. Mor's was perfectly positioned to intercept Mance. This likely encounter provided the conspiracy with both a priceless asset, a hardened, motivated infiltrator, and the means to facilitate his entry. Morse could have sent word ahead to his co-conspirator, Wyman Manderly, setting the next phase of the plan in motion. This prearranged alliance explains Mance's suspiciously convenient admission to the castle. In The Prince of Winterfell, Theon recalls that Lord Manderly had brought musicians from White Harbor, but none were singers. So when Abel turned up at the gates with a lute and 6 women, he had been made welcome. 2 sisters, 2 daughters, 1 wife, and my old mother, the singer claimed, though not one looked like him. Some dance, some sing, one plays the pipe and one the drums. Good washerwomen, too. Lord Wyman Manderly brings hundreds of pigs, food, wine, beer, horses, nearly everything needed for the feast. But despite having musicians, a juggler, and a singer in his employ, all the way back in Bran 3, A Clash of Kings, he doesn't bring this singer to Winterfell. White Harbor is a major port city with a famously lavish court. For Wyman Manderly to arrive with a full retinue of musicians but lacking a single singer is peculiar. It establishes a convenient gap in the Bolton festivities, a gap filled perfectly by the timely arrival of a mysterious singer. This strongly suggests the need for a singer was manufactured by Manderly to provide a plausible reason for Abel's admission. Pre-planning is further suggested by a web of coordinated actions that predate the wedding, the most blatant of which is the fate of the 3 Freys who disappeared between White Harbor and Barrowtown. As Theon recalls in A Dance with Dragons The Turncloak, Ramsay searched for them in vain. The reader, who hears Wyman Manderly's oath of vengeance in Davos 4, Dance with Dragons, knows that they were murdered on the road, a fact that Manderly later makes full use of by serving them in the infamous Frey pies at the wedding feast in The Prince of Winterfell, pretending the human meat is pork. The consumption of these pies acts as a litmus test at the high table. Other than Manderly himself, who eats his own pies as a performance to trick the others into eating it, the people who are served the pies should be oblivious. Only those sitting at the dais are served the pies. Wyman Manderly, Roose and Ramsay Bolton, Walder Frey, Aenys Frey, Hosteen Frey, Jane Poole, Theon Greyjoy, and Lady Barbary Dustin. Lady Barbary Dustin subtly refuses the pie, drinking wine instead, and pointedly tries to pressure Theon, who she hates, into eating it. This raises the question, how did Lady Dustin know not to eat the pie? The answer lies in her earlier coordination with Manderley. Lady Dustin traveled to Winterfell with Roose Bolton's party, sharing a wagon with Jane Poole. This journey through winter conditions would have taken considerable time, during which she could not receive ravens. However, the conspiracy's planning preceded this journey. Manderley had already decided to murder the three Freys on the road between White Harbor and Barrowtown before Lady Dustin even departed Barrowtown with the Boltons. The timing suggests that Manderley could have coordinated with Lady Dustin about the Frey pies before she left Barrowtown, or even earlier through intermediaries like Harwood Stout or Roger Risewell. What she would not have known during her journey was Mance's involvement, as his interception by Mors Umber and subsequent admission to Winterfell occurred while she was on the road, and would have been improvised by both Mance and Umber. This explains the pattern of compartmentalization that we see throughout. Lady Dustin knows about some elements of the conspiracy, the Frey pies, the general plan to undermine Bolton rule, but remains unaware of others, Mance's role, the details of the escape plan, until she arrives at Winterfell and observes the coordination between the Spearwives and her own men. Lady Dustin's refusal of the pie is also the second time on the page that we have seen her refusing to break bread and salt with the Boltons. Back in Barrowtown, the Boltons force Harwood Stout to host a feast for them because Barbary Dustin outright bans Ramsay Bolton from her hall. Breaking bread and salt, along with sleeping in a hall, is the traditional way to gain guest right, as we tragically learned at the Red Wedding. Why is Lady Dustin going out of her way to avoid breaking bread and salt with the Boltons and Freys? She is never once seen eating or sleeping in the Great Hall. By never accepting bread and salt from the Boltons, she retains the right to harm them. Her avoidance signals that Barbary Dustin is planning something, that she's aware of Manderley's pie, and by extension, her complicity in the broader conspiracy. It signals that the Northern Conspiracy was an active network, forming plans long before Mance helped Theon escape, though the integration of Mance into these plans would occur gradually during his time in Winterfell. The coordination within Winterfell extends beyond high table signals to active clandestine cooperation between the Spearwives and key northern lords, strongly suggesting Mance becomes part of the conspiracy during his time in the castle. The sequence in the Turncloak reveals a pattern of intelligence gathering that would be reckless without pre-established understanding. Before any overt action, Lords Harwood Stout, Barbary Dustin's sworn man, and Hother Umber, a known conspirator, are seen talking quietly in a corner of the Great Hall, away from Bolton ears. This is a direct link between Dustin's faction and the wider conspiracy. And in Theon 1: A Dance with Dragons, Lord Stout is also seen joking with Roger Risewell, Barbary Dustin's brother. Roger and Barbary are siblings of Lady Bethany, Roose Bolton's second wife. Bethany died and her son Domeric was killed by Ramsay in the North's worst-kept secret. Another factor to note is that Wyman Manderley has been taking his famous hour-long privy visits. But in Davos 4: A Dance with Dragons, we learned that Wyman Manderley doesn't have these bowel problems. And when he's going to the privy that long, he's actually using it as a pretext to get away from the meal and plan something in secret, which suggests that Wyman Manderley is up to something. In any case, after Theon witnesses Stout speaking with Umber, one of Abel's washerwives, Rowan, approaches Theon, subtly questioning him on how he originally took Winterfell, asking about secret ways into the castle. Theon's refusal forces the conspiracy to seek answers elsewhere. As Theon goes out for a walk in the cold after being confronted by Rowan, he witnesses Rickard Risewell, another one of Lady Dustin's brothers, in an intimate encounter with the spearwife Frenya beneath the burned tower. The description of the spearwife is consistent with Frenya's description in Theon 1: A Dance with Dragons. This encounter is revealing. Frenya's mission includes killing Jon Snow's enemies inside Winterfell. As established in other chapters, the modus operandi of the Spearwives is to isolate men under the pretext of a romantic encounter and then kill them. Despite this MO, and despite later killing men using this same tactic, Frenya makes no move against Rickard Risewell, who is part of the Northern Conspiracy and one of Lady Dustin's allies. His survival and continued presence in later chapters, unharmed, indicates that he is not perceived as one of Jon Snow's enemies, or an enemy of Mance's conspiracy. Given Rowan's earlier line of questioning to Theon and Lady Dustin's simultaneous secret search for the Crypts, the logical conclusion is that Rickard was aiding Dustin's search for secret passages. He is likely one of the men that Lady Dustin claims she sent looking for the crypt. Upon returning to the hall after seeing Rickard, Theon is summoned by Lady Dustin. She's not present at the high table, having been absent herself, and enters the Great Hall anew. Her first demand is for Theon to take her to the crypts, confirming that she was actively searching for hidden parts of the castle. The timing suggests that Rickard reported his lack of findings to her. Shortly after her brother, Rickard Ryswell, is seen in the underbelly of the ruins of the Broken Tower, she tells Theon that my men have not been able to find a way down into them. They have been through all the undercrofts and cellars, even the dungeons, but Rickard Ryswell is one of Lady Dustin's men, and when Theon sees him in the burned tower with the washerwoman, he was looking for the crypt. Given Lady Dustin's unexplained absence, it seems likely that she was also checking the dungeons herself, showing that Lady Dustin is dedicating significant resources to finding the crypt, while simultaneously professing that she hates the Starks with a very thin excuse. In A Dance with Dragons the Turncloak, Theon agrees to lead her into the crypt, having to dig it out with a shovel for 30 minutes and use an axe to break the door free of ice. This establishes that nobody has been using the crypts, at least up until this point. However, this leads to an apparent contradiction in my own theory. In A Ghost in Winterfell, the Spearwife Holly approaches Theon to ask about the entrance to the crypts, which would be an unnecessary risk if Mance was working with the conspiracy from the beginning. This likely indicates that the alliance formed gradually during Mance's time in Winterfell, rather than being prearranged, and that communication is not perfect, and information transfer within the conspiracy is also imperfect. The compartmentalization makes sense. Lady Dustin's search for the crypts precedes Holly's later inquiry, suggesting the Spearwives only learned about the crypt's importance after observing the northern interest in them. Lady Dustin's behavior once inside the crypts betrays a familiarity she claims not to have. She notes the absence of swords from the statues, but gives selective reactions. Despite her professed love for Brandon, she does not first lament that his sword is missing, an omission he would have despised. Instead, she first points out Lord Rickard's sword. It seems that if she loved Brandon that much, her eyes would be drawn to him first, but she draws attention to Rickard's missing sword first instead, trying to draw eyes away from Brandon's missing sword. Similarly, she says nothing about Eddard's missing blade, despite her openly conflicted feelings about him, and as she departs, she casts, quote, one last lingering look at the likeness of Eddard Stark, but remains silent to Theon. These omissions gain significance alongside circumstantial evidence that Lady Dustin is concealing prior knowledge of the crypts. She insists on and leads a search for the crypts in secret. There is no evidence she told Roose Bolton about them later, especially when the castle is looking for places where a serial killer could hide and operate, or where people could secretly enter the castle. After finding the crypt, she tells Theon to keep his mouth shut about it. Roose Bolton doesn't seem to look for the crypt, nor does Ramsay search for them when he sacks Winterfell, suggesting that the Boltons don't know about the crypt. If the Boltons, one of the main bannermen of the Starks, don't know about the crypt, and none of the other lords mention it either, that is a strong indication that Lady Dustin knows way too much about them, and is keeping them from the other lords. Once inside, where nobody can overhear, she displays a familiarity that surpasses casual hearsay. She knows the layout of the crypts, including collapsed lower levels that not even Bran or Ned have explored. Only Jon Snow appears to have been down there in living memory. While we could attribute this knowledge to Brandon Stark's tales told in the aftermath of physical intimacy, another detail undermines her credibility. When Dustin passes the Ancient Kings, she identifies a missing sword by noting the streaks of rust left behind. However, these rust marks are commonplace on the oldest statues, making it impossible for a first-time visitor to distinguish a recently removed sword from one lost decades prior. It is highly improbable that Brandon Stark provided an exhaustive inventory of which ancient kings still bore their blades between intimate sessions. The logical conclusion is that Lady Dustin has been in the crypts before, and the North remembers. Her specific intent to search for them, her precise knowledge of their state, and her ability to detect a missing sword among rust-streaked ancients all point to a history that she is deliberately hiding, and which may further implicate her in the Northern Conspiracy, the murders in Winterfell, and the sending of the Pink Letter. The intricate nature of the escape, the murders, and the probable dispatch of the Raven during the escape suggests a hidden alliance between Mance and Northern dissidents. In A Ghost in Winterfell, a 44-year-old man who marched with Roger Ryswell is found dead at the base of one of the walls. The curious detail here is Ryswell's reaction. He dismisses the death, suggesting the man was drunk and fell. This is bizarre behavior from a lord whose sworn man has just been killed. The casual dismissal suggests either complicity or willful ignorance, designed to avoid further investigation. Later in the same chapter, more people die around this area of the castle. Yellow Dick is found dead outside the kitchens. Lady Dustin and Lady Walda have serving women around the kitchens sometimes, as Theon mentions in The Turncloak, A Dance with Dragons. Mance Rayder's spearwives take credit for killing Yellow Dick, saying, quote, "He stank as bad as you," to Theon. There's basically 2 locations for all of the deaths in Winterfell. 3 people appear to die near the crypt, and 3 people, including Yellow Dick, die in the southwest corner of Winterfell. The deaths in the southwest corner of Winterfell appear to be attributable to Mance Rayder. Meanwhile, the deaths near the crypt appear to be attributable to Lady Dustin's faction, who are the only people who know where the crypts are. In our final chapter in Winterfell, Theon 1, A Dance with Dragons, Little Walder Frey is found dead near the First Keep, where Bran fell in A Game of Thrones. The First Keep, ruined and seldom visited, is where Mance talks with Theon secretly, and likely serves as the conspiracy's operational headquarters. It's distinct from the Broken Tower, also known as the Burned Tower, which is adjacent to the First Keep. The First Keep has a central position in terms of sneaking around the castle by running on walls and roofs, as explained by Bran early in A Game of Thrones. As established in The Turncloak, A Dance with Dragons, the entrance to the crypts was in the oldest section of the castle, near the foot of the First Keep, which had sat unused for hundreds of years. In other words, the crypts are located under the First Keep, making this area a nexus of conspiracy activity. Returning to Little Walder's death, after he's found dead, chaos erupts in the Great Hall between the Freys and the Manderleys. The room includes Hother Umber, Aenys Frey, Roger Ryswell, Wyman Manderley, Lord Locke, Walda Frey, Ramsay Bolton, Harwood Stout, and Hosteen Frey. After Manderley is wounded, Maester Rodri attends Roose Bolton, while Maester Medrick tends to Manderley's wounds. Abel is present throughout, and when Roose asks him to play, he gives the signal for the washerwomen to act by playing an unfamiliar song from his seat at the high table. This moment marks Mance Rayder's last appearance in the series so far. There are conspicuous absences during this chaos. Lady Barbary Dustin, the young Maester Henley, Lord Slate, the Hornwoods, and the Serwins, all Stark loyalists. Their whereabouts are unstated. Lady Dustin, who has shown a keen interest in the crypts located near the foot of the First Keep, is a prime candidate for involvement in Little Walder's death. Lady Dustin's whereabouts are unstated at the time of death. She's not in the Great Hall, nor is she seen by Theon in his travels across Winterfell, which eliminates the stables, the kitchens, the yard, the Godswood, and the south, east, and north gate. The west gate is crowded with Frey soldiers who say nothing about her, and the kennels are guarded by Ramsay's dogs and watched by the people at the west gate, and she's unlikely to be hiding with Ramsay's dogs. Other than the crypt and the rookery, every other building in Winterfell is either locked off by Bolton guards, burned down, or otherwise out of Lady Dustin's reach. Lady Dustin being in the crypt would implicate her in Little Walder's death and the larger conspiracy, while being in the rookery would implicate her in writing the Pink Letter, which would also implicate her in the larger conspiracy. Therefore, by this point in the story, we can be almost certain that Lady Dustin is involved in the larger conspiracy. She is more likely to have been in the crypt than the rookery for a few reasons. First and foremost, Lady Dustin and Wyman Manderley rarely carry out subterfuge themselves. They use agents to do things on their behalf. Why would Lady Dustin be at the rookery herself when she could send someone else, like Lord Slate with the letter to the rookery, or one of her illiterate sworn swords? And if she knew of Wyman's distraction ahead of time, or Theon's escape, she could have prepared the Pink Letter in advance, sending it to Maester Henley, or otherwise hiding it in his pockets. Henley could have then waited for a signal to dispatch the Raven, such as the Freys riding out of the west gate right next to him, or the general chaos, or an empty rookery. We must be reminded that Maester Henley is sworn to House Slate, and Lord Slate, along with Lady Dustin, is missing. Second, the crypt is more secure than the rookery. Since she was absent during Little Walder's death and the fight with Manderley, she will be highly suspect after Theon's escape. The safest place for her to be in is the crypt. With Theon gone, Lady Dustin is the only person in Winterfell who knows the location of the crypt, other than her sergeant, so she can safely hide there. In conclusion, the evidence demonstrates a progression from pre-planning, Mance's interception, the missing singer, the Frey pies, to active coordination, the Spearwise working with Dustin's men, the search for the crypts, to the synchronized chaos of the escape itself. The alliance between Mance and the Northern Conspiracy explains every aspect of the Pink Letter. Its means, motive, opportunity, and insider knowledge. What began as separate conspiracies merged into a coordinated effort to manipulate Jon Snow, eliminate the Boltons, and restore the Starks to Winterfell. After examining 30 suspects and methodically analyzing every piece of evidence across thousands of words, the conclusion is clear. Mance Rayder and the Northern Conspiracy, working together as a unified force, what we might call the Alliance of Snow, are the most likely authors of the Pink Letter. This theory overcomes every single logistical hurdle, possesses the requisite knowledge, demonstrates clear motive, and is supported by substantial circumstantial evidence within the text itself. More importantly, it has survived scrutiny where the others did not. Could there be alternative explanations? Maybe. Some might still cling to the more esoteric possibilities like Bloodraven, but these are not reasonable doubts. They're speculative reaches, unsupported by textual evidence. The preponderance of evidence points towards the Alliance of Snow. The text provides us with the means, the motive, the opportunity, and the evidence of coordination. When a theory accounts for every known fact, while other theories require us to ignore inconvenient details or invent unsupported scenarios, the choice becomes clear. I need to admit that this is not the conclusion I expected to reach when I began this analysis. Initially, I was convinced that Theon, Stannis, or Ramsay wrote the letter, probably Theon. The narrative seemed to point in that direction, and I had made many elaborate justifications in my own head for why it made sense. During my first livestream analysis with an audience, I thought I had definitively proved myself wrong and shown that Mance Rayder had acted alone. But when I was writing the script and gathering research and looking closer at the text, I encountered several obstacles I had overlooked. Literacy, for one. Then came the issue of access. How could he reach the rookery undetected? How would he know which raven to send to Castle Black? How would he obtain pink wax and seal the letter properly? Each question chipped away at my confidence until I had to admit that my initial conclusion didn't withstand scrutiny. And that's okay. In fact, it's necessary. The Pink Letter mystery has generated passionate debate in the A Song of Ice and Fire fandom because so many readers approach it with a preconceived notion, often rooted in which characters they like or which narrative outcomes they prefer. We want Stannis to be alive and on top of things, so we convince ourselves that he wrote it. We want Ramsay to be more cunning than he appears because otherwise he's kind of boring, so we ignore the gaps in his knowledge. We want a simple answer, so we stop looking for complications. But the text doesn't care what we want. The evidence exists on the page, independent of our desires or our initial impressions. Our task as readers is not to make the evidence fit our theories, but to make our theories fit the evidence. This requires intellectual honesty and the humility to admit when we're wrong, qualities that serve us well beyond literary analysis. After reading these chapters dozens of times, tracking every detail, mapping every character's location and knowledge, and spending over 20,000 words methodically analyzing the Pink Letter from every conceivable angle, I can say with relative confidence that the Alliance of Snow is the solution that best fits the facts. Not because it's the most dramatic answer or the most satisfying to any particular faction of readers, but because it's the answer the text itself provides when we read carefully and honestly. The pink letter is not a simple mystery with a simple culprit. It is the product of multiple conspiracies converging at a crucial moment, of desperate people with aligned interests finding a common cause against a common enemy. And so, in the chaos of Winterfell's frozen halls, an alliance was forged, and a letter was written that would change everything. Winter isn't coming. It's already here, in the castle, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The Boltons forgot their place, forgot their station, forgot their pride and their hubris. They forgot the Crypts. They forgot winter. And above all else, they forgot that the North remembers.